So again, welcome everyone to our paper session, which is focused on preparing for paper sessions at AERA and other conferences. And I'll turn it over to our wonderful facilitators or presenters, Kimiko and Andrew. Thank you both so much.
Hi, folks. So we're going to present on paper sessions today. We wanted to start off with some introductions. So in chat or out loud, since there's only two of you, and while Corey doesn't know this, we do happen to know you both. But so you guys in chat or out loud, share your name, where you're from, your home institution, and then your experience with paper or oral conference presentations, and then indicate something you would like to learn today or a burning question if you have any. We'll give a couple minutes, or Hui, go ahead and jump in.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Hui. I know everybody here mostly, but I'm surprisingly also at Ohio State. So this will be my first in-person AERA, and I haven't done a paper session before, so I'm interested in learning how that goes. Yeah, just the logistics of it. What are the, I don't know, best ways to go about preparing for a paper session and actually presenting, fielding questions, stalling so then you don't get hard questions, things like that.
I think we will address that, hopefully. So. And then Tiffany, do you want to put in chat or talk out loud?
I can share. I'm Tiffany. I'm also from the Ohio State University. We are coming from the same programs. So yeah, although this is my first time in-person AERA conference, but I don't know why I'm also the chair of the paper session. So I want to have some experience, like what the chair should be pay attention to, because I don't have the experience of that. Yeah.
I don't know if we have that explicitly in our slides, Tiffany, but I think that we definitely will have some room at the end to talk about that.
Okay, great.
Then, hello, we've got one new person. Hi, Tanya. I'm Kimiko, and then Andrew is presenting with me. We were just going to have people introduce yourself. I know you just jumped in, so if you want to throw in chat just your name, where you're from, if you have any experience presenting, and if you have any burning questions that you wanted to learn today.
Sure. Sorry, just making sure that my speakers work. Hi, I'm Tanya Wineland. I'm from Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. So I don't have any experience with paper sessions, but I do have experience with a poster session, and then I'm having my first roundtable at AERA this year. Something that I'd like to learn today, or a burning question I have, is when you're a beginning researcher, junior researcher, how you translate even conceptual ideas that you're developing into a presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to apologize if you all can hear honking outside. Don't know what's going on, but something is. But we can go ahead and move forward, Andrew. So today we want to start with those introductions. Also talk about general format of some paper sessions, what you do before your presentation. Andrew will talk about what to do during your presentation, after your presentation. We'll address questions and comments, then we have a little interactive activity. And of course, feel free throughout to throw questions in the chat. We'll try and get to those as we're going, but we'll have some time at the end also to address any other questions. So first, we wanted to start off with some key dates for AERA, since we are the first preparing for AERA session from the MOTSIG here. And the first deadline on here is today. So the deadline for program changes is today. So if you need to change the program, get on that, and hopefully you did. And then the other two that I have highlighted here are that March 10th is the deadline for presenting authors to register for the annual meeting. So if you are the first author presenting in your paper, make sure you register. And then also March 10th is the deadline for final paper uploads. You don't have to upload your paper, but you can. So just highlighting that if you want to opt into uploading a final paper. Thanks. You can go to the next slide, Andrew. All right, so general format for paper sessions. I do want to note that the details I'm about to give are about paper sessions. Symposium sessions are slightly different. They can be different, so be sure that you're communicating with your chair if you're in a symposium session. But don't worry, today's still going to be applicable. This slide's basically the only thing that's not. So sessions are about 90 minutes. Well, not about, sessions are 90 minutes. And there's about 5 papers per session most of the time. So you can plan on presenting for about 12 minutes, leaving about 5 minutes for questions and transition time. And then, of course, you'll hear me say this again, but practice, practice, practice so that you can hit those 12 minutes and be ready for questions. We can go to the next slide. So before your presentation, before you even leave for the conference, there's a few things that I like to do. Obviously, prepare your presentation, whether that be in PowerPoint, slides, or iPresentation. I believe if you're the first author, everybody got emails today for iPresentation, which is the gallery through AERA that you can go upload to. But I believe that you can still have slides or PowerPoint also, but that means the iPresentation will be able to be loaded directly on at the venue. And then I like to save my presentation in a couple of places because you never know what could go wrong. So the first place I like to save it is a flash drive, and then I'll either email it to myself, save it to the cloud, or if you've got another way you like to save it. But that flash drive is the one that I always make sure I have because you never know when there's not going to be Wi-Fi or something. So key places, make sure you have it in more than one place. And then I said it already, but practice before you go, make sure you're practicing. So practice with a friend, practice with a sibling, a significant other. People in your program are nice, but also people out of your program are often sometimes a better audience because then you know when something you're explaining doesn't make sense versus the people in your program are probably a little more familiar with your research. And then take note of when and where your session is. Put it in your phone, write it down, just so that you are fully prepared. We can go ahead to the next slide. So tips on creating a good presentation. So for slides, you want to have a clear theme that's easy to read. Many universities have templates you can use. So I pulled Ohio State's, I pulled VCU's, I pulled Georgia's. And honestly, you can just, most of the time you can Google these. You might have one that's just for your whole university. There might be one for your specific college or program. But Google it, see what comes up. You might have to put in like your name so they know that you are affiliated with the university, but then you'll be able to download them. But those are really good because they're ready to go. It's a template already for you, and you are representing your university, so you should probably use university PowerPoints if you have that. And you want to use simple transitions. Spinning and flying transitions can be distracting. You want the audience to be focused on what you are saying and not the show that is happening on the screen necessarily. There are times when animations are helpful, especially if you have figures or graphs that are really complex, or they might just be a little overwhelming to the eyes. You can use boxes, arrows, highlighting to highlight what you're specifically talking about. So that can help add clarity, especially if you're doing some of those advanced models that might get confusing to your audience. But with those transitions, you want to keep them simple. And then high contrast works really well, especially with projectors. So on Zoom, presenting tends to be a little different than in person, right? So on Zoom and on your computer, a presentation theme might look really great because your computer's really crisp. But once we have a projector, especially if it's one that's casting like onto the cloth and not a TV projection, which some places do have, some places don't, but I always like to prepare for the latter. Especially with projectors, you want to make sure that it's high contrast because projectors tend to wash out colors. And so having light and dark makes it easier to read. And then you want to have a good font size, of course. Your first audience member might be 3 feet away from the screen. Your first audience member might be 10 plus feet away from the screen, depending on your room. So make sure that you can read it from a distance. And then clear fonts. We love those really beautiful cursive fonts, but we want to make sure that we're using something that's easily readable. And for this, a tip that I have learned over the years is you want to use a sans serif font. So the fonts that have those little like ticks on the T's and little dashes and whatnot on the letters, those are called serifs. You want to look for something that is sans serif. Arial, Calibri, I don't know how to pronounce that. But what those ones like that tend to be better than Times New Roman, things like that. And you can go to the next slide. And then tips on creating a good presentation content-wise. So you want to cover the essentials. Don't feel pressured to cover every detail of your study because you probably won't be able to. Those 12 minutes go by really, really fast. So you aren't going to be able to cover every detail of a full paper in 12 minutes. So you want to know what is the key takeaways that you want your audience to have. What are the most interesting results if you aren't going to be able to present all of your results? Again, back to some of those more complex models. If you've got 3 outcome variables, 4 moderators, and tons of predictors, then you're not going to be able to present every path that might be there. So what is the interesting stuff to talk about, and what is less interesting to talk about? And then when you have that, you want to then think about, well, what is the key components that my audience needs to know in order to understand these results and these takeaways that I want them to have. So focus more on, if you have a result that's talking a lot about one specific theory, focus a lot on that theory in your introduction slides. If you've got a result that isn't as interesting or that you aren't going to have time to talk about, you don't need to focus as much on that concept. You can, of course, mention it because it is part of your study, but focus on the parts that your audience is going to need to understand. And then keep the text on the slides brief. I will note that some of our slides here are a little wordy. We would love for you to take screenshots, whatever you need. But in person, you really want your audience to be focusing on what you're saying. You're the one who wrote it. You're the one with the knowledge. The slide itself cannot tell them what you did in your study. So keep the text on the slides brief to help audience members understand what you're saying. It should pair well with what you're saying so that they see that and they're like, ah, that helps me. And then they're listening to what you're saying to expand on it. And then if you must use jargon, as some of us must at all times, make sure to explain your terms. At AERA, I think it's easy, or other conferences, it's easy to think, hey, I'm presenting in a MOTSIG session, so everyone should understand these theories that I'm talking about. But you never know when a person specializes in one theory and not yours, or anyone can attend the sessions from any division or SIG. So you never know if it's not a bunch of motivation researchers in the room, if it's, say, a school principal or someone from another division that doesn't know the theories, but is there to really better their practice and themselves to learn from your research. So make sure that you explain your terms, because jargon we sometimes miss. And so it's really important that we tell people what we mean when we say certain things. A good way that you can catch jargon is to go back to presenting to someone who isn't in your lab, isn't in your program. So find a buddy, a lay person who you can present to, and they'll be the ones who's like, oh, what did you mean by that term? And then you'll know, oh, that's where I'm getting jargony, and that's something I'm going to need to define. And then here are just 3 brief things I like to consider when I'm preparing presentations. The first is, what can I cut if I have less than 12 minutes? Things go wrong. Somebody might be late. Somebody's presentation might run over. There might be tons of questions, technology problems. So if I have less than 12 minutes to present, what slides am I going to skip? What concepts am I going to cut short while still giving my audience a full understanding of what I want them to take away? So having things in there, of course, because you're preparing for 12 minutes, but knowing that you might need to skip some things because you may not have 12 minutes to present. And then on the other hand, what would I love to expand on if I have extra time? Sometimes the 5th presenter doesn't show up. Sometimes you've got extra time because, oh, sorry. I'm gonna grab a drink of water. I don't know where my voice went. Sometimes one of the presenters might show up. Sometimes the presentation before you might run short. So I like to know, hey, I have what's essential in this presentation, but if I get extra time, I would love to talk more about this concept or this result because I think it's interesting, but if I only have 12 minutes, I'm not going to have time to cover it. So I like to take note of what you can expand on. And then what questions might people ask? I like to think through where I think folks will have questions. So if I think, hey, I don't have time to cover this fully in my presentation, somebody might have questions about that, preparing and making sure I do know how to expand on that if they have a question. Or again, going back to practicing with a friend or someone who doesn't see your research all the time, isn't studying the same thing as you. They're going to have different questions than someone who is doing research with you. So getting perspectives from both ends is helpful so that you can prepare to answer those questions. Then go ahead. And then finally, on the day of your presentation, I think that as grad students, we sometimes think, oh, it's a conference. I got to go to every session. I got to get as much as I can out of the conference. But really, I was in another session earlier this week and they said this, I'll say this, I've heard it before. And I think we really just have to reiterate it every time we're preparing for conferences. It's okay to take time for yourself, especially in the session before you present. So do what you need to do to be ready. If that's taking off the session before you present to read through your slides, to go find the room, to eat, do that. Do what you need to be confident, to be comfortable, to feel like you will bring your best self into your presentation. And then finally, arrive early to your room, which again might have to do with you taking off the previous session or leaving early. Arriving early to your room will allow you time to download or load your presentation onto the computer in the room. So in person at AERA, there's often a podium, a computer. So that's why I like to bring a flash drive. You're never sure whether or not the computer is going to be able to connect to the internet, but most of the time you can put in a flash drive and drag your little presentation over. And then that gives you time, of course, if you arrive early, to test the technology. Is there a microphone? Is it working? And then finally, it gives you time to meet the other presenters. Somebody somewhere decided that all of your papers go together. So you're probably researching similar things. You probably have similar interests. So it will be really great to meet each other before your presentation, because after, you never know who's going to try and be grabbing people to talk to different people. So meet those folks before you even present. Thanks. I think Andrew will now talk about during.
All right. So for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about what some best practices during your presentation and then following your presentation. And some of the information, as evidenced by this last bullet point on this slide, has come from a workshop series we did last year for the Motivation SIG GSC, which was on public speaking, as well as we had networking and poster development. And the public speaking material you're going to be seeing here, I drew that material from that material last year to speak to you today. So in a general sense, there's some overall best practices, and I think this taps into what we was asking about at the beginning. What in having never done a paper session at AERA before, I could tell you that a paper session is if you've presented at a conference, even a local conference at your university, and you've done a standard talk, the 12 to 15-minute talk, as Kimiko spoke of, then you have a pretty good idea of how the AERA sessions run. But there's still, things we can cover. So first of all, having a timer that you can glance at. So there is usually an individual, either the session chair or discussant, or if that's the same person, who's there with the little pieces of paper to give you, okay, you have 5 minutes left, you have 2 minutes left, you have 1 minute left. Well, it also helps to have either a stopwatch or a phone that has a timer going on, some way for you to keep track of that yourself. You don't want to fully and completely rely on that other person if you must. It's useful to have more than one way of going about that. So that's a good thing to have with you. Having a hard copy of your slides. So now what Kimiko talked about was in advance, you have you email your slides to yourself, you have it on the cloud, so on and so forth. A really old school way of doing this would be to literally print out your slides and have them literally in your hand. That is another way of having a backup in case technology decides to just fail on you and there's some sort of disaster. And then, and this is definitely something I think of often, is that an academic talk, while primarily informative, is also a bit of a show. Right? You have an audience, you are presenting, you may not necessarily be focused on entertainment, but you are needing to be compelling to your audience. And having this be a show quality to it, having it be a dynamic and exciting presenter can go a long way to achieving the goal of informing as well as entertaining. And so how to go about that is you can utilize some public speaking skills. So if I end up running over, I will cut some slides out here. We're glad to share the slides with you. I have a lot of slides on this. I'm going to try to keep both during and after to be 20 minutes. So first of all, when you are presenting in a academic conference setting, especially at AERA, you have to think about where you are. And think of public speaking and a paper session as performing in a play. I don't know if anybody here has done theater. I know Kimiko has, but you think of it as performing. Oh, hey, all right, Tanya. So you think of it as performing in a play where you need to amplify your voice. There is no stage, but you are at the front of the room. You are the star for your 12 minutes. So virtual settings make this a lot easier, but if we're getting back to in-person settings, you have to think about the room that you're in. So Kimiko said, get to the room early. That's great for a variety of reasons, but primarily, at least in my head, for this purpose, you get to see how big is the room. I mean, is this a giant space? Is this a small meeting room? That helps to gauge what the acoustics might be in the room, your ability to amplify your voice. No one would recommend you shout through your presentation, but you do want to make sure that everyone can hear you. Now, some venues have microphones. They have a podium, you have a little mic there. Not all of them do. Actually, most of them, I don't think, most of them don't if they're small rooms. So having, scoping out the room, getting the lay of the land, that is a great thing to do to start with. If you do have a microphone and you choose to use it, in general, it's good practice to stand real close to it. I've seen too many people do this where they wander around, their head turns, and they're away from the microphone, and that's not serving any purpose at all, other than becoming the human Doppler effect. They're suddenly talking, and so suddenly you hear every third word. So be aware of that. Larger rooms do require louder voices, especially if the acoustics are such that there's echoes in the room. So be aware of that. And then audience configuration. Again, depending on the room size and the room layout, you may have people that are right on top of you, or you may have chairs that are further away. So when you're doing your presentation, be cognizant of where are the people. Keeping your head raised is a very effective technique for keeping your vocal cords open and avoid constraining them. You don't have to shout as much if your neck and head are up and you are projecting out. I have a link there that you want. I believe we can share the slides. I think Corey, we can talk about that after the fact. But I think if we share the slides, there's a YouTube link to Jimmy Cannon as a public speaking coach who has some excellent vocal exercises for how to public speak effectively. Not only are you amplifying your voice, making it loud enough, but you also can convey information confidently. And I have a number of citations here about how communication is a two-way process involving a mutual exchange of information. You are conveying the information that hopefully your audience is actively listening to you, and then you actively listen to them when they ask questions. And I'll talk about that after your presentation. But if you practice, as Kimiko said, your content and your flow, you avoid verbal stumbles, you increase your confidence, not only how confident you feel, but how confident you sound, which is half the battle, right? You want to make sure that you sound, yes, indeed. Yes. Oh, hi, Aaron. Glad you're on. So essentially, half the battle is conveying confidence as much as it is being confident yourself. And so speaking smoothly and without jumbles and stumbles goes a long way to accomplishing that. Increasing vocal variability improves presentation quality. And what do I mean by that? Well, I've been trying to model it for you here in the last 10 minutes. Speaking outside of a monotone voice, you can sound very much like a robot and not even intend to. So if you have some vocal variability, some highs, some rises, or lows and going up and down, that is something to practice. It's a skill you develop, but you become a very compelling speaker when you're presenting if you do it like that. A lack of confidence may actually be due to literal stage fright, which there's a YouTube video I've linked below where you can see methods of reducing actual stage fright, which, and again, there's no stage, but you're getting up in front of people and you're presenting, you're nervous. And you may have trouble, even if you're confident in your topic, you may be very, very nervous to convey that topic to other people. And unlike a poster session where you have your elevator pitch, which I do have mentioned briefly near the end. Oh, yes, then you check out the link, Corey. I'll get you there. 12 minutes goes by very fast. I think most people will say that 12 minutes it goes by faster than you might like. It goes by faster than you might expect. However, it's still 12 minutes. And for 12 minutes, you've got to convey that confidence. And it can be a very frightening endeavor to spend 12 minutes standing in front of people and delivering content that whole time. It's not the 2-minute elevator pitch where people come and go and there's a natural din in a poster session. There's a natural noise at work. No, it's silent. It's all you. And that can be very, very discomforting. So check out those methods for reducing stage fright. Then vocally, you are maintaining confidence, but you can also maintain confidence in your body language. Nonverbal cues convey as much, if not more, information about your confidence than what your vocal ability can do. So there's a number of little tidbits here. First and foremost, maintaining eye contact. There's an old theatrical or theater piece of advice that I actually don't abide by, which is you look at the back of the room, you look at the wall behind people. That works in theater because you're on a stage and no one expects them to be looking directly at you. But when you're presenting at an academic conference for that special 12 minutes, yeah, you're breaking the fourth wall. Indeed, you need to talk to people. If you're staring at, especially it's a small room with no stage, if you're staring at the wall behind everybody, everyone will notice. And it's going to be very weird. That is not, I would argue, not the way to go. You want to convey, you want to make eye contact with people and also make eye contact with multiple people. It's very easy to find that one person to fixate on and stare at them the whole time, but they'll feel creeped out and you're not going to be able to talk to, you're not conveying information to anybody else. So keeping eye contact and letting your eyes roam a little bit to multiple people, keeping the head raised not only vocally, but also has a good nonverbal cue to it. It's conveying, it's the bottom there, power posing. There's research on this that you actually stand in a confident, upright pose. You are increasing your confidence. You are increasing how often or how much people think you are confident. And there's some fun research on that. The fourth bullet that I kind of skipped over, never turn your back to the audience. There's not as much call for this outside of theater. You might end up turning your back and delivering a line to the back wall, and that's no good. In an academic sense, for the most part, the only time you might be turning your back to the audience is when you're doing something else you should never do, which is directly read off your slides. If you're directly reading off your slides and staring at the screen, you are then turning your back to the audience and turning your back to the crowd. Don't do that. There's no benefit in doing that other than directly reading off of your slides, which helps you get through it. Sometimes you'll have graphics and figures that you may want to walk people through. That's one thing if you're helping guide folks through a graphic. But if you're just reading text, there's no reason to do that, especially if you've got a computer in front of you. If you must read anything, read it at the computer terminal and keep your body forward. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Yes. Oh, that's hilarious. I literally started this slide by saying, avoid filler words is a very powerful method of conveying confidence verbally. Oh, yeah, we all do. The technical term is called disfluency, but it's often referred to as filler words. This is your brain trying to fill the dead air. We are just biological creatures. When we're vocalizing, we're very uncomfortable with silence, especially when we are presenting, very uncomfortable with silence. So we fill the voids with the ums and the ahs, and it's more than just that. It can be, in other words, or I mean, any number of things. I'm trying to remember. I can't quite remember. There was a job talk I went to once, and there was the speaker. In any case, I think was the way she the word in any event or something like that. It was just a phrase. It just kept repeating and repeating and repeating. It was a way to fill the void. It's very noticeable for those that pay attention to that. Also, yes, there's one thing I really loathe, and that's when someone says kind of or sort of in the middle of speech. You know, we sort of studied this research on academic motivation. No, you either did or you didn't, and you did because you're talking about it. So it's you didn't sort of do anything. So I hate that. Deliberate pauses are very effective. That silence can be utilized to really can hit home a point or make people or allow people to think. So don't be too uncomfortable with that. And slowing down and not flying through it prevents that garbled or fumbled speech and reduces the use of filler words. So taking your time. Again, 12 minutes goes by fast, but it also can be utilized to the fullest. Oh, it's awful, Corey. Yeah, it's once you're aware of it, it really pains you once you're aware of the ums and the ahs, or not even the ums and the ahs. Again, the filler phrases. In any event, here's the next slide. That was an attempt at a joke. Efficiency and precision with language. So being efficient with your speech and avoiding vague or abstract wordage. I think I already complained about the second bullet. The one thing, I had a professor in my master's program, Dr. Nash, love her to death. She was one who hated the use of the word thing. She said, if you use the word thing, by definition, there is a better word than the word thing. So when you're presenting, try to avoid just saying thing and say anything else that can better describe the item or the concept or construct that you are trying to describe. And being efficient also reduces time spent presenting, right? So it actually makes things go quicker. Okay, elevator pitches. I am going to skip the slides. I've got 5 minutes. Essentially, elevator pitches are these 2-minute pre-created, pre-written, at least in your head, pitches. Not as useful for a paper session, but very useful for after a presentation. If you have folks that want to know about your work and you present it in a paper session and they weren't there to see it, having an elevator pitch prepared is very, very useful. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I want to get to the after. So everybody good so far? I've got 5 minutes left. I don't want to be over too far here. So after your presentation. So, all right, you've delivered your 12 minutes of very efficient dialogue. You have, you've maintained eye contact. You've delivered your content in an efficient way. You've not run over. Now what? So your final slide should have your personal information, your name, your email, your social media contacts, if you have it and you're comfortable with it. A great way to put yourself out there. That's the moment that people can grab their phones and take a picture of the slide, and then they have your info because you may not see them again throughout the conference. And appropriately, yes, in the chat, you hashtag AERA 2023 skills building moat sig. Yes, share us on the socials. So there is a general aversion to question. I found people are very nervous to get questioned and are delighted when none arise, because what if somebody comes up with the fatal flaw that we didn't think of that wrecks the whole thing? And I disagree. I think that questions are a good thing because people have been paying attention to you enough to articulate a question. And dare I say it, they may come up with something you haven't thought of, and it actually benefits the work and advances the work in some way. You can prepare for questions, perhaps based on limitations. If you have a little limitations section in your proposal that you've written up for AERA, maybe someone will notice it. So prepare for that if you can. You can thank the audience as well as your collaborators. That's just generally a good thing to do. And then stick around the room to network and answer additional questions. When you're done and you sit down and the session's over, you might have people coming up to you, thanking you for your wonderful talk and wanting to talk to you more. Don't bolt out of the room as soon as things are over. You may be glad it's over, but you don't convey that to people. You want to stick around. If you've got business cards, if you're that suave and you have business cards on you, then certainly utilize them and give them out to people if they want them. And then consider sharing your slides with interested participants. Unless the information is proprietary, consider, if they want them, if they want the information, that's a great further dissemination of your work. I wanted to focus in on the questions element here because this is unique to paper sessions, right? Posters, you have a quick dialogue with people. They may ask you a question or two, but the poster is what it is, and then people move on. In the paper session, you have a period of a few minutes where you are stuck. You are in a place where people, if they have questions, they will ask them, and you have got to say something. And what do you say? Well, the very first thing is, I don't know, is an acceptable answer. There is a tendency for people to guess, to blindly guess. If they have, if somebody asks you something you're not prepared for, and people might say, well, it might be this, this, and this. Don't do that if you can help it, because you're nervous and you may say something that you'll be sticking your foot in your mouth later on. It's better to say, we haven't thought of that. I don't know. It's a great avenue there's a million ways to say it. It's a great avenue for future research. That's an excellent, thank them. It's an excellent question. Thank you. That's a wonderful question. And then you have to skirt it. You skirt it. But it's in general better and honestly more ethical in my view, but it's actually something I think that people will respect. If I don't know the answer, I am not going to make one up. I don't know, and that is okay. Be succinct. Do not, if you can help it, ramble in an answer, because maybe more than one person has a question, and you don't want to burn up the whole question time with one person, with one question. And then if you are calling on people, which you may or may not be, sometimes the facilitators, the session chairs, the discussants, whoever it is, they might be fielding questions for you. But if you are the one calling on people, make sure to keep your eye out for the whole room. There's a tendency to look in one direction, look at the front, you miss people in the back. There's nothing more frustrating if somebody has a burning question and you miss them. So keep an eye out for everybody, okay? And then the last thing as far as after the presentation is through, is the role of discussants. Paper sessions, there's a variety of ways in which they're unique. One really unique element to paper sessions, especially symposium, if you are in a symposium, we mentioned at the front that this talk could be useful to both, is you may have a discussant who at the end of the session, their whole job is to summarize everything that took place. They may or may not be the session chair. I know, Tiffany, you mentioned being the chair and what your role is. So sometimes the chairs are also the discussants, and they have to come up with their own talk, summarizing everything. Well, the first thing I will tell you is get your paper to your discussant. If you have one, get a paper to them. They will thank you for it, and they will be very grateful as a session presenter, getting a paper that they can read through and have an idea of what you're talking about. There are times, this is the talk that Kimiko spoke of at Ohio State she went to. I'm familiar with that talk. I actually wasn't there, but I know what was said. Was about sometimes discussants will be critical of your work or of someone else's work, of the session. They might have comments, critiques, or criticisms. Try not to be fazed by that, okay? You, as the presenter, can defend yourself if the opportunity arises. You can offer rebuttals, or you can answer questions that try to get at this. Just don't feel like you have to just submit to a discussant who's critical of you if that happens. And this is rare, I must say. I'm not going to say that this is a common occurrence, but again, you don't necessarily want to end the session on a sour note if a discussant is critical. So feel free to have the agency to rebut points if it comes up, if you have that opportunity, and try not to let it bring you down. There again, the discussant's job is to synthesize. And they may synthesize a number of ways. And then lastly, you may be asked to answer questions along with your other session presenters. You answer questions at the end of your individual session and your individual talk. And at the end of everything, you then may have to have, there's a general Q&A session, and you may be presented with questions that have to do with not just your talk, but other people's talks. So try to pay attention to other people's talks. It may be very easy, given how nervous you are, to just zone in on your own and may not pay attention to the other talks. That may come back to bite you, because you may have a question that involves the synthesis of your work along with other people's work. So keep that in mind. Really try to and pay attention to the other talks and be prepared for that as a potential outcome. Okay. All right, so I think now we're ready to do the interactive activity, which I'm only 2 minutes late for, so good, yay. What we had envisioned originally was to go into breakout rooms, but that seems, given that there's 6 of us in total, I don't necessarily think we have to do that. I think we can kind of collaborate together on this interactive activity. And Carter, we may or may not keep the recording going. I'll explain the activities. I think it'd be good for anybody watching the recording, and then we can turn it off if we choose. But what we thought would be a good idea for you is, in the spirit of this before, during, and after framework for this talk, is to go back to where we are now, which is before. We are in the before. We're in the middle of it. So we thought it would be a good idea to help you prepare for your presentation right now by developing a checklist of things to do. So where do you stand on your session? And if it's not up, I mean, again, you may not be doing a paper session, you may be doing any session, and we don't want to leave you out. So if whatever the session may be, write up a little checklist right here in the next few minutes. Write up a little checklist of things that you need to do. Now, if you don't know where to start, you can locate your institution's branding template for your PowerPoint. You can hunt down your proposal and refresh your brain on what exactly you said, because it was several months ago, right? It was last summer we turned in these proposals. You can pull up the AERA program and find where your session is, when your session is. Further, and that's not on the slide, but you could also look at accommodations to get to AERA. Have you done all of that? If your actual presentation is in good shape, what are some logistical items? Because this preparing stage can snowball. You can end up getting real close to the conference, and suddenly you find yourself with 12 things to do. I'm gonna stop sharing. I think we're on. Thank you. So let's take a few moments here, 3 or 4 minutes,